Hello everyone, my name is Victor Monga. I am serving as governor for Issac Orange County chapter. NDR has been a great challenge and has solved a lot of solutions for other organizations as well. Today we have brought Nicole from Darktrace and my good friend named George from Pacific Dental, who have implemented NDR solutions in their company, and we want to talk about what are the strategies they have implemented, and obviously we want to talk about the NDR space in general as well.
Great, Victor. Thanks so much. I'm Nicole Egan. I'm Chief Strategy and AI Officer for Darktrace. And Darktrace is a world leader in applying this whole area of artificial intelligence to the existential threat of cybersecurity.
Hi, I'm Nemi George, Information Security Officer and VP of IT at Pacific Dental Services. We're a leading national and dental support organization providing support services to dental offices in about 24 states in the country.
Before we get started, can you both briefly introduce the NDR space and talk about what is this NDR and NTA space in general?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think that what we really see is, I think out of the NDR, the part that's probably really important is the whole concept of taking a modern new approach to detection and response. And I think, where the N in the network came from historically is, for many of us, we always view the network as definitely kind of the system of truth, right? It's where things happen, raw real-time data flows. But as infrastructures have changed and evolved, I think it's broadened the definition of NDR. Today, we see this modern method of detection response applied to cloud, applied to SaaS applications, applied to email, applied to industrial environments and operational technology. So I think it really is much more now about how do we do detection and response? Do we look at historical attack data and see if something matches? That's what we traditionally call things like signature-based detection. Or are we actually learning about the specifics of the environment and figuring out how to detect and respond based on each uniqueness of each organization and company? And that's how I think of really detection and response in NDR.
Namely, many solutions collect and analyze wire data from network. How does NDR is any different? And how does provide NDR holistic solution in your security toolset?
I think the point of realization for me was when I started my team 5 years ago, I had to build out a security organization, and at the time I was a team of one. And Nicole has talked about seeing technology, for instance. And while seeing technology is really good, the problem is, one, you're analyzing a ton of data. Usually you have to react to this data. And my question was really, what technology can I bring in that allows me to see as much, gain as much visibility into my estate and proactively prevent, malware, ransomware, or other sort of attacks from happening within my environment without having to go out and hire a ton of security analysts. And the main premise of an NDR, at the time it was called an NTA solution, is you have one choke point in your network. In our case, our core switch. You are able to get all the network data from your core switch into this appliance that studies your environment, and you're able to see things real time, in flight, and you're able to take action. And the key thing here is the amount of data that it's able to pass through and give you actionable information, right? On average, we see multiple hundreds of thousands of alerts every day, and it's impossible for any individual to be able to sieve through all that information to see what is relevant. Using technology such as Darktrace's NDR, you're able to get down to the handful of actionable items that are high risk to your environment so you can take action. So that was the main reason. I wanted something that was effective, something that gave me the visibility that I needed without having to throw a bunch of investment, especially on the people side, upfront.
You mentioned back then you have a great tool set when it comes to security operations. How does NDR adds another additional layer to that? What are the key drivers made you realize that you need NDR for your security operations?
I think the key integration points for us are email, right? Email is still one of the biggest attack vectors across your environment, obviously followed by your core network. And being able to get those two feeds, so I'm able to see what's going on within my network, I'm able to get data and telemetry from my email users as well as my cloud instances. And that's another thing that Nicole mentioned earlier. The name kind of doesn't do justice to the technology when they say network detection and response. Yes, it does give you the ability to detect things in your network and respond to it. But in our case, we also have an AWS connector, we have a connector into our Box environment, we have our emails and all of those things coming together. So being able to see all of that in that sort of elusive single pane of glass that we keep talking about in information security, those are the key drivers, right? And being able to speed up our time to detect, increase the consistency of our detection, and being able to detect 0 day faster than some of the traditional security tools that we have. Those were the key drivers for us.
Nicole, since 2010, we have begun an era of next generation security and network, cool hip words, IDS, IPS, NTA. Is NDR just another hit word, or is it here to stay? Is it here to actually help our organizations to fix the problem that we've been having about detection and response? Describe the NTA and NDR space for our audience so they can have a little bit of background what an NDR and NTA is.
Absolutely. So in terms of it being here to stay, I mean, I can speak from our experience, which is we started looking in this space back in 2013. And it really started in an artificial intelligence lab and looking at how AI algorithms could bring value to this space. And if you fast forward now to 2021, we now have over 5,000 companies of all sizes and all industries fully deployed and getting value out of this technology every day. And we see a very bright future. We see continued strength and growth in this area. As well as kind of expansion maybe into some adjacent spaces. But absolutely, I think we're over that hype cycle curve that Gartner likes to speak about, and we're to the point now where we have quite broad market adoption of the technology.
Nicole, how is this different than a SIEM solution or a SOAR solution? If a company is already using a SIEM and SOAR, they have some sort of automated response playbooks. How is it different? How does NDR is different than SIEM or SOAR?
In many ways, I see them as complementary technologies, and I know that's sometimes a difficult pill for people to swallow because many companies are trying to consolidate, their security tool stack at the moment. So it really depends is the answer. I think what you get with an NDR or this broader detect respond is a lot of visibility, very good coverage, but you're also going to have things that complement it. I mean, you're still going to have your endpoint, you're going to have your firewall technology, so don't run out and get rid of your perimeter defenses anytime soon. But I think what you will see is SIM, which tends to be more of a data collection, data aggregation, and place to analyze what's happened in the past. It can be complementary. Because again, we're talking more the raw real time, what's happening right now in my environment, right? When we talk NDR. So they can be very complementary. We will see, I think, SIM technology still be deployed, especially where there's a regulatory compliance issue, right? If you need, because of the regulators, to be able to go back and be able to do that type of historical analysis, reporting, investigation, you're going to see that for SIM. If you're really looking at something that then is for that real-time detection and what we call autonomous response capability, that's very much where the NDR comes in. You also asked about SOAR. SOAR is an interesting area, I think, because in many ways it does help the SOC to respond, but it also assumes that you know what kind of attack you're going to be up against because you have to predefine what that response is. And when you look at, kind of Darktrace's view of the world, we actually can take a novel, new 0-day attack or very targeted social engineering attack and autonomously respond to that in the absence of a playbook. Now, if someone's already taken all the time to define playbooks for known attacks, we certainly can hand off to a SOAR technology. But again, for the novel, the 0-day, some of the new strains of malware we're seeing, then the autonomous response would really be what you'd be relying on to step in real time.
Nicole, we understand there is no one size fits all, so I'm sure NDR has many use cases. But if you would have to generalize, if you would have to actually pick one specific use case that it can fit almost or it can be applied to most of your customers, what would that be one use case, and how does it help fighting cybercrime in today's world where the threats are evolving every time?
The answer is it continuously changes, and the reasons is the attacks keep changing, right? So if you had asked me this 6 months ago, I would have said they're all asking about how to protect against the next SolarWinds, right? And now if you ask me, it's all, well, what do I do with ransomware? Because that's, the most concerning attack of the day. A year ago it was phishing, right? So I think that's part of the point. The attacks are going to keep innovating, they're going to keep evolving, and so you basically need an approach that changes as the attacks emerge and change, right? So that, again, it's why rules and signatures and playbooks and historical attack data simply are not enough. As these attacks evolve, you have to have something like an artificial intelligence based solution that knows your organization, knows how you continuously change, but most importantly is always a step ahead of the attacks.
Nami, in your organization, how do you measure success with NDR or NTA technologies that you would have to provide justification, or how do you provide the return on investment for these NDR solutions?
Well, I think the easiest way to measure success is just putting applications and platforms and technologies side by side. Because at some point you've got to cut through the sales fluff, you've got to cut through the marketing. And within my organization, we take our time to run through POCs. We dedicate the time that it needs. So, you have one product that claims to do X, you have another product that claims to do Y. Well, let's put them up against each other. Have them connect to your email, right? Have an environment where you throw known malware at it, and which one detects it first, which one has a higher verdict number or degree of certainty that this is malware. So we're able to road test the solutions, and Darktrace was certainly top of the leaderboard when we did that. But in addition to that, 0 day, and that's a difficult one to really put a metric on because you don't know till after the fact, if you like. But being able to run through some of the IOCs and some of the reports we get on various malware, and then go back after the fact through your tools and see that this was detected, you actually were covered by the tools that you already have in place. That assurance, you really can't put a price to it, and that's what we get with some of the technologies like NDR that we have in place.
Nicole, we talked about artificial intelligence and machine learning in NDR space as well. What role does data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence play in modern day cyber defenses when it comes to NDR?
It plays a big role, and especially I think in this modern battlefield that we're operating in today. And as you alluded to, one of the first ways is by empowering and also augmenting the human security team. I think Nemi touched on this, but one of the big areas is how do you boil down all of those alerts into fewer meaningful security events that are worth a human being taking a look at. And that's an area we actually spent over 4 years in an R&D lab where we took machine learning, and instead of learning from the historical attack data, in this case, we had to actually learn from world-class human threat analysts. So we learned from our own Darktrace analyst team who are working across our customer base. And it did take, as I said, 4 years for the machine learning to get to that level. But today, it is reducing the amount of time it takes people to do investigations by 92%. So a 92% reduction, which is significant. So I think that is one example of where the AI comes in. But another area is what we call autonomous response technology. And that's the idea that you have these machine speed attacks and you have to have a machine speed response. And it actually buys the human team time to kind of sort out what has happened, right? And that is so important. Nemi referred to the amount of that time reduction, right, to identification and response, and that autonomous response plays such a key role in that. So I'd say that's the second area. The third area is really just this general, maybe catch-all of intelligence augmentation. There are places the AI can go just in the amount of data correlation that it can do, looking over all of those different systems over an elongated period of time. And it can help to piece all of that together in ways that just are really hard for humans to be able to do.
Maybe incidents are inevitable. We talked about it. So how does NDR help with conclusive incident investigations?
Well, I think as Nicole mentioned, the autonomous response is key. You know, there are two quotes that I always hold into when it comes to security. The first, and some of you may know the company who had this as their slogan, I don't know if they still do, that security never sleeps, right? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is that the bad guys and threat actors don't take a day off. And so when you take those two things together, if you're relying on a security operations team of just human analysts, and nothing wrong with the human analysts, but they've got to take breaks, right? They have off days. There are days where they're distracted. There are days when, if you're like me and you have security operations and IT operations, if your business is down on the IT front because you have a network issue, well, you're not exactly looking through security logs. You're trying to get your business back up. And so humans simply don't have that consistency. And so relying on a system that understands you, is able to pivot to just the specific action that is needed and rapidly apply that, that's significant. That is a game changer. And to Nicole's other point, what happens out of hours when even if you had the A team, what happens when the A team are not hands on keyboard? You need the technology to help. One other thing to mention, because there's a lot of times when you kind of hear this almost argument for or against humans versus AI. And I really don't think that that's needed because they complement one another. You know, one of the things that we saw with Darktrace early on is that there are certain things, because it's detecting what it thinks is an anomaly within our environment, which may just be a business process that it's not seen before. And the human analyst comes in and can acknowledge that to say, no, this is fine. This is not a problem. And the system is learning from that. So the more the human interacts with the AI, the more the AI is actually learning within your environment and getting a lot better, a lot smarter, and that increases the level of trust that you have in being able to respond. And then the final thing to mention is you had mentioned early on about early versions of IPS and IDS technology. And when those were deployed incorrectly, the adverse impact on operation was immense, right? If you had an IP address or an ISP that was suddenly blocked because they had a brief reputation score that went down due to malware or whatever, you're potentially taking your operation offline. And that blanket approach to response just didn't work, especially in a major incident scenario. The ability to surgically apply controls and various response to to whether a predetermined or a zero-day incident such as ransomware, that's unique, and that's something that greatly enables incident response teams to be effective round the clock.
Nicole, what makes Darktrace solutions unique when it comes to talking about speed, integration, user experience?
I think the thing that technology is at the heart of this. The quality of the AI algorithms cannot be underestimated. But at the end of the day, I think the approach is the thing that's most important to understand, right? And what I mean by approach is there's a lot of, we hear this phrase, AI or machine learning, and it almost has become a catch-all. But the reality is that the approaches are fundamentally different, and that means you're going to get a different result. And so a lot of times, I always ask the question, like, what type of machine learning are you using? What data are you analyzing? In our particular case, we found that this approach that we call self-learning is what sets Darktrace apart from all the rest. And by self-learning, it's the idea that you're actually bringing the AI to your business. not your business to somebody else's cloud. You're bringing the AI into your organization. It's analyzing your information, and from that, it's figuring out where the cyber threats lie and how to respond to them. And at the end of the day, what that approach allows you to do is see the 0 days, see the novel threats, see the and respond to the fast-moving machine speed attacks, but also to have a very precise response that doesn't take your company down. The way that it actually responds, because it understands the uniqueness of your business, means it can actually, as the attacker tries to maneuver, if they try to get through email and you stop them there, they're going to come over to your cloud, they're going to try there. And if the AI can stop them, but just that one piece of the process, if it can just stop that, you basically don't have to make that tough decision to take your entire operations down, right? And nobody wants to be put in that position. And so I think that's, at the end of the day, the ability to use AI to reduce or prevent cyber disruption to your company. That's what it's really about.
Naomi, you mentioned Pacten actually serve dental offices all over the United States. So you have distributed network already, and I'm sure with that you have some blind spots as well. So with NDR, how does it actually help you to actually fill those blind spots?
The key there is about your architecture. You know, a few years ago when we actually started out with Darktrace, our architecture was relatively simple, right? Everything went through the data center, everything was hurricaned through the data center. We had our Darktrace appliance, our EIS appliance feeding from our core switch. And so, you know, to a great deal, we had a single choke point and the ability to see everything coming through that funnel. As networks have become more distributed with SD-WAN and people working remotely, organizations embracing cloud first, mobile first, that choke point gradually disappears. And, you know, people say the traditional perimeter is dead, which is true. And the new perimeter is now identity and your endpoint and your cloud solutions and all of that. So the ability to get data from all of these disparate sources that we were previously getting from one choke point, that's key. And so with an NDR vendor, whatever vendor you choose to use, you need to have the ability to still get that network data. That is key, right? That is still fundamental, and most regulated industries will still see a higher percentage of the traffic going through the data center or through those fixed and traditional infrastructure choke points, if you like. But the ability to collect data from, say, your cloud sources, whether you're an Office 365 customer or your content management systems like Box, and also you, in our distributor sort of branch office network, you need virtual appliances that allow you to treat those branch offices as a unique entity that still relays into your main enterprise immune system, so you're still getting that holistic view across the board. So the one takeaway there, I guess, is it's all about the architecture. Make sure you understand where the crown jewels of your organization sit and apply the relevant component of an NDR solution. That may be a physical hardware device, that may be a virtual appliance, that may just be a client connector, whatever combination of those collectors, but you need to make sure that you have true visibility across the board. And if you have instances where you don't have full coverage for whatever reason, then ensure you have the appropriate compensating controls to cover those areas.
Nicole, so far we talked about how to implement NDR. We have talked about how to be effective. Naomi provided a great perspective on it, how he implemented it in his organization. I'm sure there are 99 ways how not to implement NDR. Give our audience a little bit of background on what are those pitfalls. What does a successful NDR deployment looks like?
It's a great question. I think the first thing is you've got to put it in your own environment and you have to run it. The second thing is where I see it hasn't worked is where people try to keep a human in the loop too much. In other words, the machine learning and AI works. It detects this new novel threat. It actually goes to take a precise and rapid action, but people don't turn that automation or active mode of the AI on. Instead, they say, well, always send this notification to my security team. Well, what happens when that happens at 3 a.m.? Or what happens when the ransomware just encrypts the data too quickly for that human to respond? It's much better to actually allow the machine learning, once you've built your trust with it, right? So yes, run it, deploy it, build your trust, but then make sure you actually get your security team to start to rely on it and think about your workflows a bit differently. You know, again, a human can still be in the loop, but maybe you want it to actually slow down the attack and then alert the human, right? And so I think there's a lot that you do have to do about trust building, but especially about thinking about the workflow differently. In fact, we see a lot of new college graduates sometimes embrace this right away because they don't have 10, 20, 30 years of, you know, looking at logs, right? And so what that means is you also can take people who don't have decades of security expertise and put this technology in their hands.
Naming evidence shows that perimeter network security is not enough because network is all over the place. It's distributed, it's not traditional one place. What are the key features you need to complement traditional network security? How does NDR provide that contrast?
And so the key thing here is integration, right? With everything you have API integration today, a lot easier than it used to be. And a lot of the traditional perimeter response systems, let's take a firewall, for instance. Most next-gen firewalls have the ability to detect zero-day. They have the ability to detect malware and advanced malware, you know, ransomware, and so on. But what an NDR solution gives you above that is the speed of detection and the consistency, the verdict score, if you like, is how sure are you that this is a malware or this is something that you should take action against. And so being able to pull that data from multiple sources gives you, whether you're going to use the autonomous responses Nicole mentioned, or you're going to rely on a human analyst to take action, the ability to essentially reference the same malware or the same incident across different systems gives you better assurance that when you take action, you're taking the right action. So, you know, too much data has never been a problem as long as you're able to correlate the data and help drive the decision that you're making. And that's what an NDR solution integrated with an EDR, endpoints, next-gen AV, next-gen firewall solution gives you, is that ability to pull it all together. So when you're taking whatever action you're taking, you're sure you're making the right decision.
Nicole, what is your suggestion about product adoption and rapid time to value when it comes to NDR solutions for organizations?
I think in terms of product adoption, and there were a few things that Nimi hit on that were very consistent with what I see across their customer base is, you know, in many cases, this combination of network and email is where a lot of people start, and I think it is a very important combination. I think the thing that we're seeing today is people accelerated adoption and moved to cloud. So cloud and SaaS, we already saw a significant uptick in that over the past year. I think we're going to see that be a primary area of adoption over the next 12 months. So I expect to see a lot more cloud and SaaS. We announced recently our strategic partnership with Microsoft around Microsoft 365 and Teams and email because of that, as well as Azure, and also strengthening our partnership with AWS around all of the AWS cloud. And then also zero trust. Nemi touched on the importance of kind of identity and access, and we have a number of our customers that have moved to zero trust solutions. So we're seeing a lot of people want to be able to also integrate Darktrace with their Okta and their Zscaler environments. So I think those are some of the shifts and changes we're seeing in adoption today.
Maybe it seems like you spent a lot of time in research and evaluating what a real and true NDR solution for your company. If you would have to do all over again, what would you do it? Or would you not do it? Give us a little bit of perspective on that.
If I had to do it all over again, I think I would just be bolder, faster, and move to that autonomous response state quicker. I think there's a degree of nervousness if you've been in the industry for a while in just letting, as I put it, the machines take over, right? And so we were using NDR essentially as just another security operations visibility tool, and still relying on the human analyst to take a lot of action. I think to something Nicole mentioned earlier, you're almost buying a sports car and driving it in first gear, right? It's just, if you're going to have the technology and you have the capability, then my advice is come up with some very specific use cases and test it out, right? You can use, you can get malware, there's so many areas where you can go get various strains of malware and throw it at the system. Does it detect it? Is it able to be surgical in its approach, in its response? If you're able to do that and you're able to vet that out over a period, that may be a week, that may be a month, whatever gives you the level of confidence that you need. But the point is, move to the point of autonomous response, because that's when you're really getting value for money, and that's when you are moving from just a visibility state into a full response and protection mode, which is what we're ultimately looking to do. And then the second part, which I kind of touched on earlier, is just visibility. You know, as your network expands, as the traditional perimeter shrinks, and we're looking at more edge computing, we're looking at people connecting from all manner of places, different devices, non-traditional IT environment, your traditional visibility is decreasing every day. Just make sure that your security architecture and instrumentation is actually changing alongside that. There are lots of organizations you go to that still have a very data center centric security architecture. And you look at the data, and more of the data is now cloud first, more of the data is entirely SaaS centric and not coming through any of the internal controls. So you've got to make sure that your protection, your security is essentially moving in line with the way your organization evolves. And those would be my key takeaways.
Nicole, it seems like Darktrace have spent a lot of time understanding NDR space. So what's next? What do we expect out of Darktrace, or even in NDR space in general? Tell us a little bit about what does Darktrace thinking about it for as bringing next in this space?
Absolutely. I think it's actually a really exciting time for the space based on what I see going on in our R&D labs. And the first area I would touch on would be, some people call it preventive, some call it predictive. But this whole idea of now using AI to actually analyze and understand the different attack paths an attacker might take into your environment to get at the crown jewels. And there's tremendous amounts of work being done in that area right now. It's an area that today traditionally had been really outsourced to service organizations, things like penetration testing, for example. And in many cases, people, run a pen test. We have some customers that might run a pen test just once a year. We have other customers that seem like they're continuously trying to run a pen test, but maybe quarterly. Well, if you can put the artificial intelligence in the system and just have it continuously testing across all of your environments and doing this attack path modeling, but most importantly, then feeding that back into your detection system and your response system to strengthen your whole environment, then that is, I think, a major next step. Finally, the area after that we're starting to work on the labs in, and we would expect to have probably a year out from now, would be something that we call self-healing systems. So after an attack does happen, again, another big services business, and a very expensive one at that, is the whole idea of incident response kind of cleanup, right? How do you make sure that you got the attacker entirely out of that environment? How do you clean up your systems? And this goes back to that point of, I think a lot of this industry focuses on the breach and how did the breach happen, but also the aftermath of these is where the real expense is and the real disruption to the businesses. And so I think if we can get in there that kind of idea that the AI could take the systems back to the last kind of operational state they were in before any data was damaged, encrypted, any damage was done, that's going to be a huge step change for the entire industry. So I think those areas of prediction, prevention, of IT self-healing systems, and really forming almost this kind of closed loop or optimal loop approach where the AI continues to make the environment stronger.
Naomi, you touched upon the role of integrations with NDR, and solo NDR or alone NDR is not enough. It has to be integrated with other solutions that you already have in your tool set. If you would have to prioritize those integrations, what would you pick? What are your top 3 integrations that you would have to pick?
I would say just maybe 2 or 3 things that I would do first. Email, I think, is the first is your network. That's almost a given, right, with the technology space that we're talking about. The second would be email. It's just organizations, even organizations that have embraced modern collaboration methods and on the surface say, hey, you shouldn't use emails to send confidential information, you should send links, not send attachments. The truth is, it's very difficult to change human behavior. So email is still a big attack vector. The third would just be your identity and access systems, right? Knowing your users, where your users are coming from, impossible travel, multiple failed login attempts, those sort of data. If you have those, and I think just leaving it at 3, then you have a very sort of mature process and you can build onto that. Most people would think, well, why haven't you set a firewall? And the only reason I haven't put in a firewall is most firewalls and most modern firewalls are already, integrating some type of AI capability in that. So if you can integrate that, that's perfect. But if you want to do that as part of a subsequent phase, if you focus on your email, your network, and the identity of your users, I think you're starting off on a strong footing.
Nicole, as we are wrapping up this session, any final guidance or call for action to our audience to really embrace NDR approach for them?
The first thing I'll say is when somebody contacts Darktrace and says, we've been hit by ransomware, what do? The first thing we do is turn on the autonomous response, because that ransomware or malware or whatever it is going to keep moving within the systems. And so the faster you can spin that up, but that gets me to the second point, which is, gosh, I wish they had it running already, right? So that is definitely, the first thing. Another area that we haven't touched on yet today is what we call proactive threat notification. The ability to have, whether it be your technology provider like Darktrace, whether it be a managed security service provider, have another set of eyes. They can also be looking at these AI models. So in addition to the autonomous response, also, it doesn't hurt to also make sure that you have that person in the world who's looking and has your back and kind of can help you through it. So those are probably some words of advice, but building that trust as fast as you can, even if it means test it first in the email environment. Network is pretty sophisticated. Turn it on first in your email, move to your SaaS environment, your cloud environment, and maybe we're going to see this reverse where people start ending with network versus starting there.
Naomi, as we are wrapping up this session, tell us, our audience, what's one final words that you would say for them to really trust NDR technology and this artificial intelligence and embrace that for their organizations?
I think my last words would just be that, embrace the technology. Our threat environment has changed, our networks have changed, our user behaviors have changed. The threat models that we were dealing with a few years ago have changed. And I think, Nicole, this might be me stealing one of the things you said, and I might get this completely wrong, but something you mentioned one time is taking a human to a machine fight or to a machine gun fight something. You've got to have the right tools for the battle that you're having to deal with. And I think that NDR gives us, it's not the only solution that you need, but it certainly allows us to be better equipped to deal with the threats that we have. And just to echo one last thing that Nicole said, which is have diversity in your approach. One thing I always tell folks is I use the cyber defense matrix to go through an evaluation of all the tools that I have. And this is an eye-opener for me. I did this exercise a few years ago, and you guys can Google cyber defense matrix, and it sort of goes through your ability to detect, protect, respond, recover, and so on. And what you will find for, I would hazard a guess and say at least 70, maybe pushing to 80% of organizations. If you really take all the tools that you have and place them in the cyber defense matrix, and you kind of split it down by users, network, endpoint, cloud, and so on, what you will find is that you're almost bunched up to the left, which is where you have your detect, piece. So a lot of us are so focused on the ability to detect things across our environment. But the problem with that is you need a lot of eyes on glass to do anything with that. And as organizations, clamp down in some cases on budgets and try to be more fiscally responsible, the ability to just throw buddies at detection and monitoring, so to speak, that budget continues to shrink. So what we need to do as security professionals is spread so we get all the way to the respond and to the recover piece, because that's what gives us a holistic approach to security. Just being able to see stuff is simply not good enough. If you're not able to respond and do so without a human analyst at the wheel, at the screen, then you really have to think about perhaps moving some of the investments you have into other areas that give you response capability, recovery capability, but across your entire infrastructure stack.
Well, this was wonderful. Thank you, both of you, for being on the show, and hopefully our audience have gained a lot of value out of understanding what NDR technology is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.